Good evening, everyone, and welcome. I will call this special meeting of the Bloomington City Council to order. It is Monday, August 19th, 2024. And it's a special meeting. We've got exactly two items on our agenda. And the main item of discussion is item 2.1. It's our 2025 preliminary tax levy and general fund budget discussion. We've also got our, as we always do, our City Council policy and issue update. But as I said, item 2.1 is the main event this evening. And with nothing else on the agenda, we will get right into it. And I will turn it over to Kari Carlson. Good evening.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. Tonight, I'll be providing you with an overview of the current status of the preliminary 2025 budget and property tax levy. And I will be highlighting key issues that will require attention in the coming months. We'll be seeking your guidance this evening for the 2025 preliminary tax levy amount, which the council will be setting at the September 9th City Council meeting. This evening's agenda will focus on our budgetary approach, public engagement. We'll have an analysis of revenues. We'll also examine the expense drivers in the 2025 preliminary budget. I'll review the working model for the 2025 tax levy and discuss tax levy options for your consideration. Additionally, we'll provide some information on a proposal from the GFOA, the Government Finance Officers Association, to analyze the city's reserves, and I'll conclude with a review of key dates that are still coming in this year's budget process.
Kari, can I ask you to move the mic
Yes.
just a touch closer to your...
Yes.
Thank
Is
you.
that better? Sorry.
That's better. Yep.
Okay.
You got those, the dulcet tones that it kind of loses sometimes. So thank you. Appreciate it.
Sure. So our budgetary approach remains closely aligned with the community-driven Bloomington Tomorrow Together strategic plan, and our investments reflect a commitment to key areas of climate sustainability, public safety, parks, and community connection. And we are also expanding business diversity through initiatives developed in collaboration with the Office of Racial Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging and the Purchasing Division in Finance, including exploring the launch of a new target market program to support local small businesses. Each priority ensures our budget addresses current needs while laying the foundation for more resilient and connected Bloomington. So first, we'll talk about our public engagement around the budget. So this marks our third year of going out to meet people where they are at, to actively engage with the community to discuss budget and city spending. This year, we are concentrating on events where we can have a longer presence. Typically, those events that draw a larger attendance. So if we go to the next slide, you'll see the 7 events that we have for this year. We were already at the Juneteenth celebration. We are at July Wednesday Farmers Market. And just this past weekend, there was staff at the budget tables at the Learning Link Up at Valley View Playfields, as well as later that day at the On the One Music Festival in the South Loop. So included in this evening's agenda materials, there's feedback from both the community, the in-person events, as well as responses from the Let's Talk Bloomington survey. So our budget tables at community events feature an activity, which you're probably all familiar with now, but just to go over that, it's where participants can use chips that represent property taxes and allocating them across 6 categories based on their priorities. So the categories are displayed here. It's a connected, welcoming community, a healthy community, equitable economic growth, public safety, facilities and infrastructure, and parks, arts, recreation, and natural resources. And so from the data that was collected at just the first 2 events, the Juneteenth event and the July Wednesday Farmers Market, the top priorities from those events were equitable economic growth, followed by a healthy community, and then parks, arts, recreation, and natural resources. So we will be compiling the data from this weekend, from the 2 August 17th events, and then we'll have some updated results to share with you at the September 9th City Council meeting. And then we also have a similar activity online on our Let's Talk Bloomington budget page, where participants, they do sort of the same activity, but a little bit different. They rank those same priorities, but they rank them on a scale from 1 to 6, with 1 being the highest priority and 6 being the lowest. And so just want to talk about the investments that we're making, both historically and into the future, align closely with these priorities that are shown here. So they're investments in our Bloomington Forward projects that align with our priority of parks, arts, recreation, and natural resources. And based on our community feedback, desires, and priorities, we are building on those investments and allocating resources needed to operationalize this work, especially in the new Community Health and Wellness Center for Bloomington, to be a place where people can play, recreate, and stay healthy for all. And investments in facilities and infrastructure that are shown here also a high priority are reflected in our capital plan to modernize our facilities to provide core city services and exceptional service. And investments in public safety align with our goals to keep Bloomington residents and visitors safe through critical training, resources, and support for staff, and police, fire, dispatch, and our legal departments. And also ensuring accountability and transparency in local government. Investments in equitable economic growth in a healthy community. Next, I'm going to share some revenue trends of major non-property tax revenues that come into the budget. So close to 70% of the general fund revenues do come from property taxes in the general fund. However, 30% of the general fund revenues are from other sources. I'm going to go over those major ones now. So this slide summarizes the city's historical permit revenues from 2019 to 2014. So the 2025 budget request includes a reduction of about a little over $724,000 from the 2024 budget. So that's reflecting some conservative estimates, anticipated changes in economic and construction activities that might change by the final forecast that we have for the 2025 budget, but that's where we are right now. But you'll see this graph highlights in 2022, we had a $6 million spike. That was due to an increase in some development projects and just recovery from the pandemic. But it is a source of revenue that does vary from year to year depending on the economy and what is going on in development.
And Kari, if I could just ask,
Yes.
you can go back one, and in this slide too, the dotted lines, that's the normalized average. Is that what that is? Or
Yes, the dotted line is just kind of showing a trend
A
from
trend.
2019 to the 25 budget. Yes.
Got it. Thank you.
Lodging taxes, as you know, experienced a sharp decline in 2020. You can see that dropping down there due to the pandemic, but they have rebounded nicely to near 2019 levels, as shown in the graph. The last 2 years, the lodging tax revenues were above budget. Right now, for 2024, they're just slightly under budget for the year, but still increasing nicely from where we were in 2020. But we are just showing for 2025 just some, not quite to where we were in 2019, but still pretty stable. And admission taxes have also rebounded from the pandemic really nicely. They've even surpassed 2019 levels. In 2023, the admission taxes reached over 1.8 million and exceeded the 2019 amount of 1.7 million. So they are trending to be even higher for 2025. So this slide has grants, federal and state aid all together here, and that really has been instrumental in supporting city operations and services. In 2020, we received Pandemic Relief CARES funds, as you will recall, from the federal government, followed by the following year, American Rescue Plan funds, which we've been utilizing since 2021, and we are on track to have those funds fully encumbered by the end of this year, which is required, and fully spent before 2026. Those federal relief funds, a lot of that was allocated to the general fund and some other funds as well as directed into the community. Also, in 2023, we received a little under $4 million from the state for public safety state aid, and that is being spent primarily in police, also fire and legal, this year and over the next couple years. So the increase in the 2025 budget compared to 2024 reflects a significant rise in the foundational base public health funding from the state. So that is what that increase is from 24 to 25, the majority of it. And then here is a combined analysis of those major revenues coming into the general fund. This does not include property taxes. So when viewed together, this graph shows like how the light blue grant money in 2020, primarily from CARES funds, helped offset that significant decline in the other revenues, especially the orange lodging taxes that's displayed there. In 2022, the increased dark blue permit revenues contributed to the overall revenue bump in 2022 of non-property tax revenues. And then in 2023, that graph, it peaks due to that close to $4 million in public safety state aid that was received at the end of the year. And again, that overall increase from 24 to 25, a lot of that's attributed to that rise in foundational base public health spending from the state, and which must be allocated to new public health initiatives. And so that is associated in this budget with a corresponding increase in general fund expenditures. So next I'm going to talk about the expense drivers and these on the 2025 budget requests. So a large part of the general fund budget is personnel cost, and it's 75% of that general fund budget. So there is an increase of over $6 million in the 2025 budget for salaries and benefits. Competitive salaries and benefits not only attract and retain skilled employees, but they help Bloomington to be a top choice for government employment where people want to work and thrive. We received a 7.8% increase in 2025 health insurance premiums from our provider Medica through the Minnesota Health Consortium. And although 7.8% is much better than some cities receive for their health insurance, some cities we know had a 20% premium increase in their health insurance, it still is an impact of over $1 million in this budget request. Another driver, as the fire department continues to transition to a hybrid of part-time paid-on-call firefighters and a full-time firefighter model, the 25 budget request does include an increase of over $1 million to add 6 additional firefighters and 2 additional assistant fire chiefs. We have also submitted an application to apply for another SAFER grant to bring on an additional 18 additional firefighters to meet our goals for where we want to be for full-time firefighters. That would be for another 3 years. We won't be notified about that grant until later this fall, until after the preliminary tax levy is sent. But if we do receive that, that would come out of the budget request. It would not be needed. Another impact on the 2025 budget is that the American Rescue Plan funding, part of those funds, we did have $400,000 set aside to go towards hiring 3 full-time fire battalion chiefs. That is ending in the 2024 budget, so that's being absorbed by the general fund for 25. And then also the 6 full-time firefighters that were added in 2024, we did delay them coming on, but now we have a full year of that in 25. IT and fleet are seeing sharp increases in those departments, divisions for their costs. And in the general fund, there is a $200,000 increase for fire equipment charges going towards that, a $300,000 increase for police equipment, a $310,000 increase for licenses, uniforms, professional services for police. There's a little under $640,000 for fleet maintenance and replacement within the general fund, and close to $800,000 increase currently for IT costs. And investments in equipment and technology are necessary for a post-pandemic workforce that allows us to be innovative, nimble, and adapting to dynamically changing workforce. Along with that on the slide, we have some increased park maintenance costs. So between those two items that are listed there, it's a $370,000 increase for some needed improvements in playgrounds, picnic tables, and natural resources work, as well as $100,000 for evening and weekend park maintenance staff for the Herberg Fields. Some other increases that are in the 25 budget are related to climate and sustainability efforts, as well as racial equity, inclusion, and belonging initiatives. Those two together are almost $300,000 in the general fund, and does support our Bloomington Tomorrow Together community-based strategic plan, mission statement, our values of equity, sustainability, and health for all. Those initiatives are listed there. Okay, so I'm going to take a few minutes just to talk through this slide with a working model, I will stress, for the 2025 tax levy. So this is the consolidated view of our working model for the 2025 tax levy. So for the general fund, the combination of the expense drivers that I went through and reductions in federal and state revenue, as well as some of the other increases, are showing a general fund increase or a property tax levy increase in the amount of $11.4 million. That's the big driver on this slide. The communications fund has an increase of $300,000. We were planning that based on last year. Also for forestry, we had planned to have an additional $165,000 for the Parks and Recreation Special Revenue Fund. There was a planned increase of property tax levy for the Art Center Fund of $500,000, which we have shown here. There is a reduction in the golf fund of a little over $105,000. So that is reflecting the elimination of the deficit that we've had for a few years from the Highland Golf Course. So that is going away in 2025. And then we have a planned increase of property tax levy to go towards the Normandale Lake District tax abatement area for infrastructure projects. And then for debt payments, there's an increase of $451,000 for outstanding bond payments and bond payments that we will have next year. So you will note on this slide that there is currently highlighted a placeholder of a little over $4 million of potential reductions on this working model to bring a levy increase that would be close to a 16% tax levy increase down to a little under 11% at 10.95. So there's different possibilities. Potential reductions is how that's listed. It could come from potentially moving some things like some capital projects or sustainability or racial equity initiatives out of the general fund budget to strategic priorities, or possibly delaying start dates or reducing numbers of full-time firefighters in 25. Possibly looking at funds in the fire pension that could help with easing in those 3 fire battalion chiefs coming into the 2025 budget now that the American Rescue Plan Fund is ending, and some other things that we could look at too. But that's putting it all together, and we didn't want to present it at the 16% without doing some looking at options of potential reductions. So we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. So next I wanted to talk about the homestead market value exclusion. So one key benefit for many residential property owners in 2025 will be the increase in the homestead market value exclusion that was passed by the state legislature in 2023. So this is going to go into effect for 2025 property taxes. So this exclusion, it reduces the taxable market value of qualifying homestead property, and this in turn reduces the net property taxes owed by that homeowner. A homestead property qualifies for the exclusion if it had an estimated market value of under $517,200 for the 2024 assessment that is used for calculating 2025 property taxes. So this is a change from the 2023 assessment where a homestead property needed an estimated market value under $413,800 to qualify for the exclusion. So the homestead market value exclusion is progressive, meaning that as the value of the home increases towards that upper limit, the exclusion gets smaller. So for taxes payable in 2024, the maximum exclusion amount was $30,400 for properties valued up to $76,000. And for taxes payable in 25, the maximum exclusion is increasing to $38,000 for property values up to $95,000. And this is a heat map that highlights the parcels affected by changes to the homestead market value exclusion. So this is showing this is Bloomington, and the deeper the red, the greater the exclusion that these parcels are receiving compared to last year. So East Bloomington is one of the most significantly impacted areas in Hennepin County that would see this reduction.
Excuse me just a minute, Carl.
Yes.
Mr. Verbrugge?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and council members. For those who may be watching who don't use all the same nomenclature and phraseology that we do, when we're talking about impact of change here, this is actually good for the east side of Bloomington because the amount of the exclusion is a higher percentage of the taxable value of the property. So the way, if somebody's looking at this map and wondering what does the heat map mean, the places where you see the darker shades are the ones who are getting essentially the greatest amount of property tax relief through the market value exclusion.
Thank you. So the median value home value did not change much from the previous year, and it actually went down slightly. It went down to $500, which was a 0.1% reduction. However, for the median value home, the market value exclusion increased by 200%. So the exclusion in this case for 2024 it was $4,678 compared to the $14,033 exclusion for the median value home. So you can kind of see a real life example of how that would impact a homeowner. So due to that median value home value remaining relatively flat, and also commercial and industrial values going up some, and then that impact of the homestead market value exclusion, an impact of a 10.95% increase to the tax levy would be a 5.06% increase for the median value home. And that translates to a $1.38 increase per week, a $6 increase per month, or a $71.97 increase per year for the median value home. So on this next slide, I have a chart for council's consideration of just tax levy options. So we are seeking your guidance this evening for the 2025 preliminary tax levy amount, which the council will be setting at the September 9th city council meeting. This table has tax levy increase options. So starting with the initial 15.94%, which is when everything came in, that would be without making any reductions to the initial budget requests, and then going down to 7%, which would be a reduction from that initial budget request of $7.2 million. So what I have highlighted there is the 10.95%. That's what I had on the previous slide, and the impact to the median value home. But this chart shows just the tax levy increase, and then after that, the impact to the median value home, and then the monthly dollar impact, and then finally the reduction that would be needed in dollars to the budget. And I can pause here if you want to have some discussion, or I can go on. Just the remaining part I had was to talk about the proposal of having the Government Finance Officers Association do an analysis of our reserves.
I'm going to suggest let's press on with the presentation. We can double back to this. We can parse things out if we would like to talk about this separately from the recommendations from GFOA if we'd like as well. So
Okay, thank you, Mayor. That sounds good.
Excuse
Councilmember
me, Mr. Mayor.
D'Alessandro.
Yeah, I had a couple of just generic questions. Would it be appropriate for me to ask those now just for clarification on what's been discussed already?
I think that'd be fine. Yes.
Okay.
I
You
just
mind,
don't want to
sir?
get into the philosophical policy
Yes,
discussions
understood.
quite yet. But
Understood.
clarifications, I think, make sense.
Yeah, I think, so the first question I had was, so thank you, Mr. Mayor. Admissions taxes, besides MOA collecting them for Nickelodeon Universe and like the undersea stuff, where else does that get collected in the city?
Yes, Mayor, council members, Councilmember D'Alessandro, another location, the majority are located at the Mall of America, and the Mall of America has been adding a lot of businesses that do have admission taxes, but another large one is the Great Wolf Hotel that has admission taxes as well. Off the top of my head, I'm having a hard time thinking of other ones, but a lot of them are
Whirly
located
Ball.
at the mall. Oh, Whirly Ball is another one in the South Loop. Thank you.
Does the bowling alley?
No, the bowling alley does not.
Okay, thank you. The second question I have is, why do we use median value home as opposed to average? What is the benefit or not benefit? I don't know what the right answer is. What's the difference between that for folks? Thanks.
Do you want to? You can go ahead.
Sure. Mr. Mayor and council members, median value is the number that is exactly half of the homes in the community are more than that, exactly half of the homes in the community are less than that. Mm-hmm. And it has been, it's not just a Bloomington practice, it's a pretty standard practice in local government that when we're trying to peg a prototypical home and an impact that's the number we use, that's the closest we can get to it. The average is probably a little bit higher than the median is, but for the purposes of saying this is where we get to like equilibrium, that's why we picked that number.
Okay. I would assume that there are probably outliers on either end
There are.
that might skew an average, and so the median just makes it a little
Yeah,
easier.
and I think, Mr. Mayor and council members, Councilmember D'Alessandro, if I go back into the assessing report, I think they do have the average home value identified in addition to the median home value. So I can do a little digging if I get bored with the conversation.
I just wanted to make sure we had those clarifications. Thanks. That's all I have.
Okay.
Any additional just clarifying questions, not necessarily policy discussion kind of things? All right, onward. Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry, Councilmember Nelson?
Yeah, I can do it now, Mayor, or later, whatever. I would just curious if we had the impact on apartments. You talked to single-family homes, commercial, industrial. Many of our residents live in apartments too. If we don't have that right now, if we could get that at some point.
Yes, Mayor, council members, Councilmember Nelson, we can get that information for you. We don't have that right now.
Thanks.
And Mr. Mayor and council members, Councilmember Nelson, similarly with commercial and industrial properties, that one's a little bit more challenging again because the city only ends up getting about, I'm trying to remember the numbers, is it 25% or 15% of the commercial industrial tax because there's a state tax and everywhere else that it goes. And there's so many different classifications, but we have in past years tried to identify a couple of sample commercial properties just to give you an idea of what it looks like there as well. And so as we get deeper into the budget season, we can do that too.
Anything else generally, Council? All right, onward.
All right, so recently the GFOA has started an initiative of rethinking reserves is the initiative that they have, and they've had a lot of trainings at our conference. There's a session about this. They've done a lot of webinars. They've had write-ups in their magazine. And so it's good timing for what we've been talking about maybe rethinking our reserves and analyzing our reserves. So I've attended a lot of webinars, training sessions, talked with GFOA staff, and just to give you some background about the GFOA, they're the Government Finance Officers Association. They represent public finance officials throughout the United States and Canada, and they have more than 23,500 members. And so their mission is to advance excellence in public finance. They are also the organization that we submit our annual budget document to, our corporate report, and our annual comprehensive financial report. And they are the organization that does give us the awards for those documents. So they have a mission for excellence in financial reporting. And they do also work with professionals. They do consulting. They advocate for best practices. They advance interests that are critical to state and local governments. They provide guidance. They're subject matter experts across a very wide variety of public finance disciplines. So some background in GFOA. And so their Rethinking Reserves initiative. So basically, there's kind of two types of reserves, and we're talking about reserves like fund balance or working capital, like kind of the cash that we have in these different funds, so that sometimes they're used as an insurance for risk to make sure that we are covered in case something happens. And they can also be used as kind of a savings account to save up for future capital projects or large purchases of vehicles or radios or things like that. And we do both at the City of Bloomington. So just showing, this is just a slide from some of their webinars they've had about just addressing what the role is of your reserves, being very clear about what it is that the purpose of them and how they're being used and how they're being used as insurance and how they're being used as a savings account and how much is being used and what the city's risk tolerance is for them. So we can go to the next slide. So if we were to have the GFOA do an analysis for us, the goal would be to just give their expertise, their guidance of a range of assessing the appropriate fund reserve levels for our city. And their approach would be to do some statistical modeling using a risk-based analysis, considering the probability, magnitude, and other influential factors. And just looking at the extreme events that we have, what our liquidity is, our revenue stability, expenditure volatility, growth, leveraging capital projects. And also looking at the commitments we have, what our borrowing capacity is, our budget practices, and just the size of our government. So they have done this for many other cities, so it's something they have a lot of experience with. And so some of the things that we've looked at identifying where we could do some analysis in would be 3 of the utility funds that have pretty large balances and some large capital projects that we know are in the future. So water, wastewater, and stormwater. Also, the other utility fund, the solid waste utility, we do have money in that working capital for, like, if we had a major storm that went through and we had a lot of trees down, some storm cleanup costs. There's also, we do reserve, like, the rates that are going in there cover the every other year curbside cleanup that we have, and that can be a considerable expense. And we're projecting that to increase in future years. The self-insurance fund, so we do have reserves in there, a risk from large lawsuits, large claims. Our accrued benefits fund, that is where we have reserves in there to offset the growing liability we have for paid time off for employees. And the risk there. This is a slide that is showing the different risks in these funds. And so the risk in that one would be that we had payouts that were exceeding the capacity that we have in that fund. We have an employee benefits fund. The major driver of risk in there would be the cost of health insurance. And then there's our fire pension fund. And depending on how investments do, that fund can accumulate money. It is part of the property tax levy that we set money aside for that. when investments don't go well for those fire pensions, that can be a huge payout that we have to make. So analyzing that, and then the general fund. What we need in there for cash flow, we only receive property taxes twice a year, so we need to be able to have the cash flow to fund us up until July. And then also keeping in mind the volatility that we can have with the lodging taxes. So just some examples of different risks that they would analyze for us. And so the process would be to gather, analyze risk factors, to map their relationship to each other, if they're dependent or maybe they're separate, and look at limits. And then analyzing the factors, drivers, developing estimates, and just suggesting reserve levels for the council to consider. And that would probably be in a range of what you were comfortable with. And then we would have to decide if we want to do kind of a fund by fund approach. So each fund is analyzed separately. Some cities will do kind of an all fund approach where they're looking at all of their reserves together, kind of thinking about if each fund has a separate reserve, maybe the chances of things going bad and all of those are low, and you might want to look at pulling them together to see what if there's some uncorrelated risks. That would be an advantage of that approach. It could be more complex if we wanted to do something like that and have higher costs. There might be some additional analysis steps required for that. And then we'd want to do a selection of what funds we'd want to analyze, or if there's other funds we want to analyze, other than the ones I just discussed. And then a cost driver for this analysis would be if this was city-led, basically me, versus GFOA-led. And I think we're looking towards more of a city-led role, just to be able to have this knowledge and expertise going forward in-house, and also it would reduce the cost. But having the GFOA there to do training and give us this information and knowledge and models that they have. And so that's something to discuss about if that's something you think we should go look into. And it could go either way. I guess depending on their analysis, they might say that our reserves are higher than they need to be, or they might say that we need to reserve more. So if it does come back and they do have a recommendation that our reserves don't need to be as high, then there would be a discussion of what we would do with those. But I think it would be good there's been a lot of talk about if we do have the right level, and I think having an expert vendor come in to look at those would be helpful. So I guess I'll just finish up with the slides I have here. And just to take another look at where we are in our budget calendar. So on the next slide, there's our timeline. We are now in August. So here we are at our special city council budget meeting. I'm just giving you kind of a first look of how everything is coming together and getting your guidance as you come to set the preliminary tax levy September 9th. In October, we will have the utility budgets come and talk about the 2025 rates. And then we're planning, just as we did last year, and I think the year before too, to have the departments come in and give you more detailed budget presentations, like diving into those and showing what is making up their requests and why, and the challenges that they're facing. And then November would be the utility rate public hearing, where those 2025 utility rates are set for water, wastewater, storm, and solid waste. And then we'd have a similar meeting like this right now, November 25th, to get your guidance on setting that final tax levy. And then initially we had this date a little earlier in December, the first council meeting in December, but the way the calendar looks with November 25th and then Thanksgiving, and then it would be the next council meeting, just to give some more time between that discussion and doing whatever research or additional information you needed. We're planning December 16th for the final 2025 for you setting that 25 tax levy, and that being the date of the truth and taxation public hearing. So with that, I will turn it over for questions and to hear how you'd like us to go forward.
Thank you. And I'll turn it over to Mr. Verbrugge here in just a second here, but I do want to say thank you for the presentation here and the information, and thank you to you and to Chief Seal and to others who have been collecting the information and the public feedback at public events. I ran into Chief Seal and the Learning Link Up, and I saw the folks, didn't get a chance to say hello to them over at the On the One Festival, but it was good to see folks at each of those events and getting feedback and talking to people. So thank you for that. Once again this year, I think it's very valuable, and I think people appreciate it. They appreciate the opportunity to have an opportunity. So, Mr. Verbrugge.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and council members. I want to thank Kari for her work. She and her team in finance do a fantastic job in working with all of the budget specialists throughout the city to get this information prepared in a way that is well analyzed and presented to you in a way that you can have good discussions. I don't want you to be swimming in numbers here tonight, because we're going to get into these budgets over the next few months. You know, my primary objective this evening is to understand what the council's comfort level is for that preliminary levy. And Kari, if you can go back to the slide that showed the 10.95. You know, one of the things that we want to emphasize here is that we look at a couple numbers when we're setting, whether it's the preliminary levy or the final levy. So the first column on the left is the levy increase. All right, so that's the percentage of the total tax levy increase. That second column, though, is a really important one, and that's the percentage of impact to the median value home. And folks may look at that and say, well, how is it that you might levy 10.9 or any of those other numbers on the left, but then the impact to me as a homeowner is only 5%. And that gets back to the information that Kari shared about the market value exclusion and what's happening this year with some of the different dynamics. We go through this every year that Minnesota property tax system is one of the more complicated ones in the country, right? And so we spend a lot of time helping to educate property owners about the relationship between their assessed valuation, and those notices go out in March and April for the valuation appeals, and then they get a follow-up statement later in the year with the proposed notice of taxation, and the taxation is based on those valuations. Those happen at different times of the year, so it gets to be confusing. And so we spend a lot of time and appreciate the efforts of Kari and our other staff and council members who go out at these public engagement events to talk to people and help them have these conversations to work through it. So, you know, any of the numbers on the left that the council may direct us, the impact for the median value home this year is going to be less than that. For comparison, last year's tax levy increase, so the one you adopted last December for the 2024 budget year, was 7.97%. We started the year with a 9.49% preliminary levy. That 7.97% that you ultimately adopted had an impact to the median value home of, I believe it was about 6.6%, somewhere in that range, 6.7%. So it was pretty close to being on par last year. This year, because of some of the dynamics, the homeowner is going to feel it less than they did last year. The other thing I'd point out, one of the other dynamics has to do with that home valuation. This is the first year since the recession when property had a significant reset 15 years ago. This is the first year that we've actually had a decline in the median value home. So if you look at that assessor's report, you see a pretty steady increase, and people may say that sounds like a bad thing, or why did that happen? And I don't know if it's good or bad. It is just because we have a situation in the more global economy where you have inflation rates and you have especially interest rates that have been higher than what people are used to paying when they go buy a home. And the average home price, Councilmember D'Alessandro, is $397,000. So the median value is 361. The average value is 397. And the reason I think that you see the median value coming down just a tick is because we have very, very low inventory of homes that are being sold. And I think that's a direct correlation to the fact that we have really high interest rates right now. And so there are few people who are buying homes, and when they do, they're buying homes that are in a lower strata because that's going to get you lower interest payments. So I think we're seeing fewer homes in those higher strata, which is why you see that relationship between the average and the median value. So there's a lot more. This whole soliloquy is just to emphasize again that this process of taxation and valuation is really complicated for people to understand. And what I really want to focus with the council is on what do you think is the impact to a median value home that you're going to be comfortable with when we get to December when we're adopting our final budget. At 10.95%, which Kari's identified here as sort of our landing spot, and that would be my recommendation for a preliminary levy. I'll tell you that the $4 million reduction that's needed, we have identified maybe 75% of it. So we don't have all of that reduction yet identified as we've been working through the process. At the same time, we're not only talking about reducing expenditures, we're also going to continue to evaluate revenues. Kari went through the revenues. It is not unusual for us to start relatively conservatively, especially when it comes to building permit revenue, because at this point in the year, June and July, when we're starting to pull all this information together, we don't have a real good feel for what's happening in a macro economy and also in our local economy. We also, later in the year, get a better sense from our planning department what sort of projects that we have coming in, getting entitlements for development and understanding when those are going to go through the build process. So we haven't gone through that exercise yet. I think there is optimism on that front because of the fact that the Fed seems likely to reduce the rate at their next meeting and maybe another one after that. And so I think it's possible you're going to see a little bit of a loosening in terms of the construction markets and what's able to get financed in the coming year or two. So that's one area that we're looking closely at for the revenues is the building permit. We're also going to be continuing to focus on our lodging tax. Councilmember Nelson, Mayor Bussey, and I are on the Bloomington, Minnesota Travel and Tourism Board. If people don't recognize that name, that's their rebranded name. It used to be the Bloomington Convention and Visitors Bureau. So now it's Bloomington, Minnesota Travel and Tourism. And, we get the monthly reports from them in terms of occupancy and RevPAR, which is the revenue per room calculation. That information also comes into our finance department, and so we're constantly analyzing that. Councilmember Nelson had asked a question about that because the occupancy and the estimates for 24 are trailing a little bit what we had forecasted or projected based on the CVB's, BMTT's information last fall. Now, when we put our numbers together for lodging tax, we build in our own level of skepticism, right? So we're not assuming like 100% of the forecast. And I think that over at BMTT, they do the same thing. We got a little bit of a fudge factor, right? And so the budget isn't based on the best case projection, and we do the same thing here. So we're going to be tracking those numbers closely and see if there is any confidence to maybe adjust them more than what we've had going in. Because right now we're looking at pulling that number down, right? And so if we see things start to stabilize and we get good summer and fall numbers, there's, I think, reason to take a look and maybe adjust that number upwards. So it's not just reductions, it's also revenue analysis as well that goes into play here. The last thing I'd say in terms of what's driving the budget, and Kari went through some of the expense drivers, this continues to be heavily a public safety budget. For 2024, police and fire make up about 44.5% of our general fund expenditures. For the requests that were entered in this year, they represent about 61% of the increase. Okay, and it's people, it's equipment, it's vehicles, it's supplies and materials, it's the continued investment in moving the fire department to a hybrid full-time department, and continuing to invest in the police department. You also know that we had contract settlements this year with all of our bargaining units, and we had anticipated some level of increase when we prepared the budget. All of the settlements came in higher than what we had forecast. So we have an adjustment that has to happen for that as well. And that's not a bad thing. It's just a reflection of, to Kari's point, when we're looking at our salary and benefits for our employees, which is 75% of our cost, people cost. The fact is that we do have to maintain competitiveness. We have to be attractive in the marketplace to recruit and retain. And we also exist in a collective bargaining environment. And so, especially in the area of police, where you've seen some pretty significant settlement figures, we're going to be right in line with where that is all across the metro and the state. And you've seen the news, you know the numbers, that was happening everywhere, is that law enforcement especially was seeing pretty substantial salary increases. So those are some of the drivers here. And as Kari said, we are continuing to invest in the other things that the council has said are important. Those are the things related to our strategic plan. It's making sure that we're continuing to invest in sustainability initiatives. It's making sure that we are continuing to focus on Bloomington being a welcoming, inclusive place, and focused on equitable economic opportunity. Those are built into the budget here. And then it's just continuing to make sure that we are providing a level of service that the residents expect. And we're continuing to invest in the 3 big projects that residents said they wanted, right? And so we have some steps that we have to take in 2025 as we build towards 26 and 27 with the capital projects that we've taken on as well. As we get deeper into the year, we'll get into more detail. So, tonight, again, bringing it back, more of a philosophy conversation about what you feel is a right number, the kind of information that you'll need to see, and then we'll get deeper into the numbers as we go through the fall. Last thing I'll say, and I'll stop. I know you're reaching for the button, Mr. Mayor. Certainly want your input in what you'd like to see this fall as we go through these budget review meetings. My starting intent is to really focus on the drivers. I mean, we have departments where there isn't much change. Finance has like a 1 or 2% change. Public health has a 3.3% change after you take out all of the grant funds and some of the shifting of some obligations here. That's less than the cost of living for a couple of those departments, right? What I think is more important is for us to focus on places where we do see more intense impact in the budgeting process, and understanding what's driving that, and how that factors in for 2025, but also factors in for beyond 2025.
Thank you, Mr. Verbrugge. So let's continue to parse this out. Are there any questions specific to Mr. Verbrugge's monologue here?
I thought soliloquy.
The soliloquy is good too, but I wasn't sure. It's the one man act here. It's a. All right, if what I'd like to do is break this down, and I'm sure there will be some overlap between the two, but I would like to have the conversation about the tax levy increase options that we heard, and then we can kind of transition into the resource fund, reserve fund conversation that we could have as well. So I see Councilmember Lohman champing at the bit here, so.
Well, I saved my questions for afterwards, so mine didn't really fit into necessarily his, but I still have some questions.
No, exactly, and it sounds like, I don't know if anybody's got questions specific to what Mr. Verbrugge had said, or just kind of in general, but we can work back into it as well, I'm sure. So so why don't we get into the discussion? Let's start with the tax levy increase options and ask the questions, and we can start the conversation. Councilmember Lohman.
So yeah, I just had a couple of questions on some of the drivers. I saw the communication went from, it was up 300,000. I was curious about if that had to do anything with the cable reduction that we're seeing with that. I assume that that's what that was that we're seeing with that. We'll continue to see that drop. Okay.
Yes.
Should move through these quickly here. Yeah. We'll save that for later.
Mr. Mayor and council members, maybe just a quick specific response to that, Councilmember Lohman, is we've seen the franchise fees, the revenues from franchise fees basically plateau, and we're holding them flat. What is happening, I think you know this, is that the cord cutting continues to be a significant trend. It's more than 10% a year, it looks like, that are cutting the cord. The legacy cable providers it's Comcast. There's nobody else in the market. They adjust their fees upwards, so they maintain their revenue stream. We continue to collect franchise fees as they adjust those fees up, but it's plateaued because the number of accounts is going down while they raise rates, and our cost to operate continue to go up. So we have an uneven trend line there, and that's why. And we forecasted this last year when we were looking at that fund. We knew that was going to be happening.
Thank you for that. And then with the GFOA, so if we were to do, have them do that study, will they be able to review the impact on our credit rating, depending on kind of what is recommended there? Will that be a part of the recommendation, or is that something we need to ask as we're doing that?
Yes, Mayor, council members, Councilmember Lohman, part of their analysis would include the effect for our credit ratings. That would be part of the things that they're considering as they're looking at our reserves.
Cool. And then as we, I don't know if I should wait for this for later, but I'll just put it out there now. Maybe it's more of a statement, and maybe this allows us to make my comments on the other items here, is that as we look at this particular, what's being proposed here, I'm always curious about what this has on future levies. So if we were to, pick, let's say 7%, what impact does that have? Next year, will we be, looking at, 20% or 25%? So I'm always curious about kind of, what can happen with these levies as we kind of move forward with that and that impact on folks and trying to create, is what I'm kind of looking for as we kind of look here, Bear, is around, stability, for our residents, not only, our homeowners, but also our businesses and those folks that live in apartments and they dwell there. And so, if we were able to get 6.6, I don't know what that number, is on this category. If that's where we finally landed last year, what would that number look like if we were to, set our preliminary at that number? And then, we talk about, drivers and that type of thing. How much does it cost, and what is our turnover ratio, manager, for our employees, and what is the cost that is associated with that? I know that we get some of that due to the competition in the marketplace, but what is there around training? How much does that cost? Every time we lose an employee, so just we're setting those items correctly. So those are just a few of the things that I'm kind of looking at. If I Mayor, just kind of as we start off.
No, I appreciate that, Councilmember, and it's a good question. If what did the 6.97, whatever we were at last year, how did that affect this year? And where we end up this year, how it will affect the years that come. And Mr. Verbrugge brought up the need to look at this in terms of the impact on the immediate value of homes, which we see here. But I think on the far right is the other question, and the balancing question, the impact on service delivery, we've set an aggressive agenda in terms of what we want to accomplish as a council and as a city and the direction that we want to go. And I think it's an important discussion or consideration to have, balancing the tax levy increase versus the work that we're doing and how we want to continue that work, and what that all means. And I think we've talked about this in the past, and I think it would be helpful for the council as we look at those reductions from the initial budget request from the 15.94, working your way on down. What are we talking about here? What was in that first $2.7 million? And then what was in the next $1.3 million? And then what would be in the next $1.5 million? As we work our way down, what does that specifically mean regarding the services that we're providing? Does that mean we're slowing our roll on hiring a full-time fire department? Does that mean we're at, we plow snow only after 3-inch snowfalls and not 1-inch snowfalls? That type of detail, I think, would be very helpful to have and to be able to have, and I know we've talked about this in the past, but I think to be able to have that level of discrete information that kind of gives us a bit more context around all of this. It's not just, these aren't just numbers, but it's the cost to homeowners, which is an impact, but then it's also the cost of what we're trying to do for homeowners and what we're trying to do for this community, and what does that mean, and how does it all balance out? So I think, from my perspective, I think that would be very helpful, and not with the goal of looking, trying to do the a la carte. Well, what if we do this, and what if we move this over here, and we had some pudding on this side, and maybe a piece of pie here? I'm not thinking that specifically, but I think if we had it in that specific context of what we're sacrificing by bringing that number down, what are we sacrificing? What are we giving up in terms of a community? I think is an important part of this discussion.
Yep.
Councilmember Carter. I'm sorry, Mr. Verga,
Yeah.
and then Councilmember Carter.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councilmember Lohman, council members may also invite Kari to provide a response here too. But the question about the impact on future levies at different levy rates. Last year, when the council adopted the 7.97, we showed you the anticipated 25 projected levy increase was in the 9.5 or high 9 range. So what we're proposing here as a preliminary is actually not too far off what we had anticipated last year. Looking ahead to 2026, depending on what assumptions you make here, but we have a significant amount of debt service that's going to be coming on in the next couple of years. And so preliminary for 26 is upwards of 13, depending on some of the assumptions that we make here. And we have been forecasting this consistently for the last 4 years or so, as we've talked about the transition with the fire department, as we've talked about investments in public safety, as we've talked about investments in infrastructure, not just the Bloomington Forward projects that the residents approved, but many of the other facilities that we know we've had to update or rebuild, whether they're fire stations or the upcoming maintenance garage, other facilities in the community. So we're in a heavy reinvestment phase for the community. And we know that these years are going to have higher levies than people have historically been used to. And for many years, we showed people that how we were at the very bottom of all of our peer cities and what that tax impact was. And now we're in a different phase of community reinvestment, community growth. So the bottom line is we've known we were going to have heavier numbers. The question is, what do you think is going to be reasonable going forward? Kari, did you have anything more on the forward-looking rate forecast, levy forecast?
I will just add, depending on what decisions are made, if it's more of a delay of services that you want to delay till 2026, that is going to increase the 2026 tax levy. But if it's services that we're going to stop doing, that wouldn't have the same effect. So it depends how we want to make these reductions, if it's permanent or a delay. But that's right. What you had, what we were originally projecting for 2026 was higher than 9% for 2026. So This year we did have all the departments do a conceptual 2026 budget, so we have a little more defined requests in there, so we can share that as well as we go forward.
Councilmember Carter, question, and then Councilmember D'Alessandro. Councilmember Carter.
All right, thank you, Mayor. So just to clarify, I just want to be super clear, when we're looking at the 10.95 and we see the 4 million, so that means that there's an additional 4 million that needs to be cut, and we will then be at the 10.95.
Mr. Mayor and council members, Councilmember Carter, yes, and. So the 4 million was from what was initially requested by all departments. As I mentioned, we've made a number of reductions ourselves, which was the mayor's point about what were those reductions? Are those going to affect services, or
Okay.
What are you doing? We do have a gap there that we haven't closed yet.
55%?
Yeah, it's probably $1 million yet.
Okay, all right.
That we haven't yet identified. Maybe more depending on some of the decisions that we make. But to give you an example of something that we've already at least made a preliminary change to, we'll talk about the internal service funds as we go later, right? And so those are centralized operations that support the total operations of the organization. So those are things like facilities or fleet or IT. Okay, the fleet initial budget request had upwards of a 20 to a 25% increase in the assessment to other departments, just because of the future forecasting of that fund and what we need it for acquiring equipment and vehicles and servicing them. We've drawn that down already to a 10% increase. That has implications for the future stability of the fund, and so that's going to be a discussion for us later this fall. But that was a pretty significant number here. I think that alone was close to $1 million of impact just by reducing that internal service fund. I asked Kari, just as a little thought exercise, to take down a couple of the other funds and the percentages that we're increasing them to something that matches inflation. So going from like a 10% increase down to a 3% increase. And for a fund like IT, we actually go cash negative this year if we do that. For the facilities, we end up running in the single digits for our working capital balance. So, there are implications to some of those decisions, and those are the different hydraulics that we got to work through this fall.
Okay. Thank you for that. So then when I look at the expense drivers that were presented, those were super helpful. And then when I look at the tax levy working model, there are some pretty significant changes that aren't laid out as key drivers. So for example, we already mentioned the communications one, but the forestry one is increasing significantly. The art center is increasing significantly. The ice garden is also increasing pretty substantially. The debt service was mentioned. And I think that was just outstanding payments, or not payments, but an increase there. And so I guess I just would be curious to know more about those changes, because that adds up to quite a bit here. And then I think for me too, some additional questions I had, there were some pretty significant investments in the police department and a little bit more in the fire. And, we just got all that state aid money, and we made a lot of investments there around equipment and technology and all that. And so I guess I would just be curious if we just made all those pretty significant investments with the state money, like why do we now have significant investments again that we need to make? So that would just be some information that I would want to have. For the Herbeck piece, evening maintenance staff, I guess I would be curious to know if, I spend a lot of evenings at Herbeck. You all know that. And I would be kind of curious to know. I question whether there's a really significant need there. And I know that there have been concerns in the past with just the maintenance of the fields, and that's, the lack of good maintenance practices is what led to the quality and the conditions of the fields. but maybe like the full-time staff the next day could do the maintenance on the field. Like, does it have to happen right when the game is done at 10 o'clock at night? So things like that I guess I'm kind of questioning that. I also had wrote down would like to see the commercial industrial apartment kind of breakdown too. And then I guess my last question is kind of more of a clarifying question too. So with the exclusion, going back to the homestead market value exclusion, so it looks like it's 517,200 is like anything over that does not gets no exclusion, correct? And so for those homes in Bloomington, which are probably a third of the homes, I have no idea. I mean, would they then see it like a 10%, or would it be quite a bit less than that? Does that make sense?
Mr. Mayor and council members, Councilmember Carter, it does make sense. And what we can do is pull some sample properties. The problem with trying to project what a specific levy is going to do for a specific price point is even two homes that have the same valuation may have differences such as how much their valuation changed. That will affect how the levy impacts them from one year to the next, right? So it's really difficult for us to get to the level of specificity that says a home at 425 is going to have this percentage of increase. So
I guess
it is safe. I will have to work with the assessor to see what happens with some of the homes in the higher value range.
Yeah.
Because of the impact of the exclusion, but it's a good question.
Yeah, I guess my not being an expert in tax policy in Minnesota property tax, like I guess I just get concerned that the homestead market value exclusion is great for those properties that qualify, but if the median value home is in that, it would qualify, but a significant amount of homes wouldn't. It just makes me feel a little concerned there.
I would agree, Councilmember, and I think, aren't we at less than 24 properties valued under $200,000 anymore in the city of Bloomington?
It's definitely under 100. Yeah.
Yeah. So to your point, any properties valued at under 95,000, I think they're a small handful. So, Councilmember D'Alessandro.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, my thought on this was, but it did the number of homes that qualify for some exemption has gone up. The total number of homes, because it's increased $100,000. And I think based on the fact that my home value went down, and I sit literally on that median line, right, with my home. Mine went down this year, so that number went up, but mine went down, so I'm sitting pretty, right? I think that's probably true for, I would think 60% or so of the community is going to get something for sure. I would like to think so anyway. Okay, so I had a couple quick questions, and then I have some comments here. First off, I'd like to see an analysis of our employee benefits, specifically the paid time off policy that we have. I think we accumulate a lot of paid time off and people don't take it, and then they just retire and take it at the end. And I'm not saying that that's bad, but there's been a big trend in the commercial space in the community to go to use it or lose it policies. And this is why. This is exactly why. And by the way, you should take your vacation. That's just something that's good for people to do for their mental health. And we know this is a problem, and we know that this is something we should encourage. So I'd like to see an analysis on that accrued benefits plan to see if we can actually reduce the impact of that on our reserves by implementing a policy that doesn't allow for the same amount of carryover year to year and really encourages use it or lose it type situations for our employees. I'm not trying to be a jerk about it, but this is a big liability for the city. This is other people's money, and it's just sitting there. And frankly, I want people to take their time off. I want them to go on vacation. It's a really good thing to do. So that would be one question, one ask. The second one is we haven't talked about the fire pension fund and how it is impacted by our switch to a full-time fire department hybrid combo. I'd love to understand that because I feel like we keep talking about the fire pension fund as it's going to stay the way it has been the whole time when it was all paid on call. And if that's not true, or if it is true because the number of paid on call is still going to be the same number, or what, like, I'd just like to get an analysis of what impact changes there are from going to the full-time fire department. We haven't really talked about what the impact of the pension is. Like, for example, do our full-time people also still get to get that benefit? Because I thought the whole point of that pension fund was it was the thing we gave as the carrot for the paid on call because they weren't getting a full-time job, right? So, like, do those people qualify? Should they qualify? I'm thinking no, but I don't know. Like, I have no idea, right? So anything there would be very helpful to understand. And then lastly, on the GFOA stuff, I know we're going to talk about it separately in detail, but I did just want to know if we chose to do that after the discussion tonight, would they have it back to us in time for us to use it for this budget? Because that would matter to me.
Mayor and Councilmember D'Alessandro, I am not sure.
Okay.
So we haven't got back to talk to them if we are interested in what their timeline, what their availability is. Ideally, yes, but I don't know yet.
Okay. You know, I'll keep my opinion until we get to that point on that particular topic. Okay, but thank you for that. So, yeah, I think those two particular areas are helpful. The other comment I'll make, and Mr. Verbrugge and I had the chance to have this conversation a prior one-on-one, and so I'm not in any way, shape, or form like dropping a big bomb here in the middle of this room for all of you who did not partake in that conversation. I think we need to understand why we are, if it's true that we've increased the salaries and we have such great benefits and we have all these things for our employees who make up 75% of our budget, why our turnover rate is high anyway. If it's not doing the job of keeping the people here, and then I'm not sure we shouldn't be looking at how to do that differently. Now, my assessment of what the turnover is based on external perspective, right? I mean, the fact that, you know, a very large number of senior leaders and the staff and everything have turned over in the last year, some because of the changes to organization, but some for other reasons. I think we should have that conversation and say, well, are the things that we're putting in front of here, are the increases that we're doing to this budget to attract and retain staff actually doing the job, or should we be doing something else? And so, again, Mr. Verbrugge already knew I was going to bring this up, so I'm not, this is not a disrespectful thing for staff or anything like that. This is just a very objective budget question when you have 75% of your budget around that, and you're seeing what looks at a very uneducated view to be something that's not true, right? Meaning, like, it's not doing the job it's supposed to do. I think it'd be worth some analysis. So those would be my three areas, and I think they're all kind of related to that big part of the budget that that the general fund goes to pay, you know, the great folks that we have here.
I appreciate your comment, Councilmember D'Alessandro, and with Councilmember Lohman's comment earlier along those same lines, perhaps something that we could have a personnel discussion as it relates in the context of a budget, because I would like to understand better who's turning over. Is it the top staff? Are the salaries and benefit increases that we see, are they maintaining the middle or, you know, upper middle level staff at a 95% rate? And then, yes, it is doing what we hope it to do, but I don't know that answer either. And so I think it would be a worthwhile analysis to do, and I'm sure our HR people could probably pull something together for us so we could at least look at some hard data and some hard numbers and not just work anecdotally, because that's not the best way to do it.
Perception is not necessarily the reality. And, you know, it would make sense to me if you have people who are progressing, like, correctly through their you know, their tenure and their experience and growing in their job, that at some point they need to leave because they've hit the ceiling here and they move on to something else. And that could be exactly what's happening in all these cases, in which case I'd love to know that too. Yeah.
I agree with you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Appreciate it.
And Mr. Verbrugge, that doable?
That is
very good. And to look at it, I think from an HR and a personnel standpoint, but from a budget context as well, because yes, there is cost implications to staff turnover. There is cost implications to that, certainly. So, thank you. Councilmember Nelson and Councilmember Mua. Councilmember Nelson.
Thank you, Mayor. As you might expect, I have a number of questions, but let me just summarize part of that into one for you. We're going to go through each of these budgets in more detail. So if I have a detailed question about public health, I don't need to ask that right now. I can wait till we talk about public health.
Mr. Mayor and council members, again, my initial approach this year is not that we're going to go through each of the departments, because we have some departments that just aren't seeing the type of budget impact or pressure that other places are. And I think the time best spent by council is focusing in those areas where we do have some pretty significant challenges. If you're comfortable with that, if you have, and we can lay out, we do this every Wednesday morning when we meet, is we'll figure out what's the schedule going to be for working through these with the council and what we're going to bring forward. So we'll share that with you. And then if you have additional questions of something that you may not necessarily see on the proposed discussion plan, we can certainly chase that down for you.
And I think that's perfectly appropriate and a good use of time. My only request is if you can identify which departments we aren't going to specifically talk about, and or if we could just allocate,
right,
hey, we're just going to put this to talk about these quickly if there's any small things to talk about, but not go through them in the same level of detail,
yep,
just so that they come up there, because I don't think that was the intention tonight, is to go through
nope,
detailed questions, so
right,
I don't want to do that. So in terms of the levy part of it, in terms of process, there's one other thing that I would like to see a discussion on, intentional discussion, is either reductions in the budget, which we've talked a little bit about, and so we highlight those. We talk about some ideas that staff have that we could do that. I've heard some ideas here tonight on things to look at there, and then I think the city manager had also mentioned revenue enhancements. And one of the things that I see in some of our discussions, and this gets directly to the tax levy increase, is, we have this vision for our community, and it's an excellent vision. We want to be a place that people want to be. They want to come, they feel welcome here, they get engaged, they do all these things, and so we're making investments in our parks and our facilities and our services, and we're looking at our quality standards, and all of that is fantastic. The reality is that some of our residents are hurting. Some of them are really struggling to get by because of the cost of housing, healthcare, food, everything else, and they're really struggling here. And we have a very economically diverse group of people in our community, and as the city manager has pointed out numerous times, we are not the most affluent community in the neighborhood. And, so we struggle kind of between those two polarizing things. One thing I'd point out, if we look at our Bloomington Forward projects, all three of them were approved in my district and Councilmember D'Alessando's district, and only one of them was approved in Councilmember Mua's and Councilmember Rivas's district. So, not yours, Loman's, sorry. I upgraded you. It's still yours, yeah, sorry. I would also note that the one that was approved in all four of them was the one that accounts for 2/3 of the cost. But, so we're seeing different things that people need from our community. And so when we look at these numbers, it's hard to say this is what the community needs, because some of the people in our community need a very low levy increase. And some of our people are very comfortable with a higher increase because they love what they're getting and they're seeing that service level. And so trying to find that right spot is a challenge. And I think hopefully people recognize that we really take that challenge seriously in trying to balance those things. And, in my mind, and I've said this probably every year, I don't really care about the preliminary levy. What I want us to do is to take a look at everything we possibly can to provide the services that the vast majority of our people value in a great way, in an excellent way, at the level that they're looking for it, in the most economically efficient way possible. And so, if that's 12%, and we can explain that, we can tell what we're doing in the fire department, in the police department, in parks, and we believe in it, okay. If we can do that for 7%, even better. Let's just make sure we do the hard work to get there, and what we do for the preliminary levy, we've always come in under it. We've always come in under it fairly significantly. Staff works really well and diligently to work with us on that. So the preliminary levy, but just to get back to my point, I want to just make sure we have an intentional discussion about the reductions and revenue enhancements so we can, be respectful of residents in the community that are at different places. And with that, I'll wait to talk about the GFOA stuff. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Mua.
Thank you, Mayor. A few questions first. When do we expect to be fully staffed for the fire department?
Mr. Mayor and council members, Councilmember Mua, probably not until early in the 2030s. So the objective is that we are going to have about 75 full-time firefighters, and I believe the number is 60 part-time firefighters. And that essentially is sort of the current growth phase. We could kickstart that if we get the SAFER grant. We're not planning on getting the SAFER grant, but we're building in contingencies here if we do. So people are wondering what that is. That's a federal grant that pays all the costs related to new firefighters for the first 3 years that you have them, and then you assume all of the costs after that. We received a SAFER grant, which allowed us to kickstart our transition by hiring 18 firefighters with the grant, and then we hired an additional 3 more that year back in 2022. And we've applied to receive another grant that would fund a similar number so that we can keep making progress. If we don't get it, what we have assumed in our budget forecasting is about 6 firefighters per year. This year's request is different in that it had the 6 firefighters and it also has 2 assistant fire chiefs because there's an equivalent amount of supervision in how the crews are staffed on a regular basis and the supervision that's required there. And when we get into those details, Chief Seal can explain that more. And so we want to make sure that as we're adding firefighters, we're making sure that the structure is staying sound in terms of how the department operates. So I'll stop there. Okay.
Thank you. And thank you for that update, because I think it is very important for our residents to understand that this isn't something that's going to end next year. This is a conscious decision that we made to continue to support the safety of the residents in Bloomington, and that requires us to continue to make these investments for the next, 5-6 years. And so I think, to me, that's very important for us to continue to understand. That's going to be a conversation we're going to have for a long time. Next question, in terms of health insurance, it's not often that organizations switch health insurance carriers, but do we have options to look at alternative health insurance carriers to make up better pricing? I know from a government level it might be limited, but just wanted to understand that option.
Yes, Mayor, council members, Councilmember Mua, we do have a broker that we use and go out and we do RFPs for health insurance. We've been pretty fortunate in times where we have received an increase that was a lot higher than we were comfortable with. We have gone out and done an RFP, and we've been pretty fortunate of having that come back lower. And in recent years, we've been part of consortiums where we are able to have a lower premium increase due to the number of members in that consortium. So based on what we were seeing, we were expecting higher increases, and our contract had ended with the Minnesota Health Care Consortium with Medica. But we were pretty pleased at what came back. We thought it would be higher than that, but we will be going out for RFP for 2026. But just based on what we were seeing and advice from our broker, that this looks like a good deal for 2025.
Awesome. That's really great to hear that we're still doing that process, making sure that we're getting the most competitive rates. The last question, more detailed question, is just around our fleet. In my industry, I've seen a significant decrease in companies and organizations managing their own fleets due to the costs and the complications and the issues that arise with managing your own fleets. So something to consider as well is how do we manage our own fleets? Is it worth us continue to manage our own fleets or bring in a third party or something like that? Because that is a trend that I'm seeing, that lots of companies are saying, we're done with the headache and we're going to move on to something else. It might not be as feasible for the city with just the number of services we have to provide, but always an option that I would like to keep in mind as we continue to adjust our budgets and understand that. But overall, I think when I'm thinking about the budget season, the biggest thing that comes to mind is the can kicking, because can kicking is very common in our field. Managing a city, it's easy to kick something down the road so that we don't have it on this budget, but as we've talked about, it balloons other budgets. And if you do it long enough, you come to situations like ours where we are in a time of reinvestment into the city because of decisions that were made previously, because of just what was needed at the time. So it's that balance between what can we kick down the road versus what do we need to just bite the bullet on and get done right now. So as we're going through this conversation and looking at the next few months here, that's really what I'm considering and looking at is how much can kicking has gone on long enough that we have to just bite it and do what's right for the residents in the city to make sure that we can be prosperous into the future. And then additionally, what can I kick? What can I kick down the road because it isn't necessary right now? Or what can I ensure that we're going to kick down the road, but there's a timeline of when this is going to come back and we actually do the work that's needed. And so that's what I've been thinking about as I've been gearing up for budget season here.
Thank you, Councilmember Moot. Councilmember Rivas, would you like in on this conversation?
I have a lot of notes at home.
All right,
I'll be asking questions in the next
very good.
session.
We will
I
make
just
our,
wanted to listen to
okay,
everybody.
sounds good. Thank you. Never a dull conversation at this time of year. No.
Mr. Mayor, if I can.
Mr. Brugge.
Councilmember Mua's can kicking comments it's got me thinking. There's just we have made like I said, some decisions preliminarily here in terms of how we manage what we bring forward. We have included the new firefighter positions in the budget requests. Because we have been forecasting those firefighters, to the point of your question, out for a period of almost 10 years, as we know we need to do that each year for the transition. There is not another new staff request in the budget beyond the firefighters. And we know that we have needs elsewhere in the organization, and those positions aren't accounted for here. So as we go through this fall, at the same time that we're looking for additional reductions and we're looking for revenue enhancements, we're also going to be talking about where do we need to make those investments. And so a couple of areas that will be familiar for the council is continuing work from the past couple years. It's adding staff for facilities and for parks maintenance based on the service assessments that we had done, the service level expectations that the council said that they wanted to see us in practice have for the community, and what that means for our staffing and how we resource those services. We have some work that needs to be done in anticipation of the projects that are coming online, specifically the Community Health and Wellness Center, and needing to bring a couple staff on probably now and during the construction process, because they're going to be key and critical as we develop the programming for the building even before it's constructed, is having them in while we're doing that. Councilmember Nelson is correct that he has reminded us annually of his desire to see alternative revenue. And tying back again to the Bloomington Forward projects, but other things that we do, we are likely to come forward with a recommendation for a person to be a development coordinator. We've looked at a couple different models of whether you go a consultant route or whether you hire it on staff. We don't have either the expertise or the capacity on staff to do that work, right? So it's going to have to be a new body. If you go the consultant route, generally they're going to take a 30% cut or more. And based on the amount that we're talking about, I think in terms of what the council will probably set as an expectation or what you'd like to see as an ROI, you'll get a better bang for your buck if we have a person on staff doing that work. We don't have that in the budget. I have some ideas for how we do that. We'll talk about that as we go forward. But that's just a real small sample of where we have needs in the organization that aren't reflected here and are all going to be part of the push and pull here as we go over the next couple months.
Thank you. And I'll notice we've gone through everyone now and the preliminary discussion, and we haven't once talked about the busy principle of what are we going to stop doing. And I will at least bring it to the forefront once again, knowing that it's a difficult discussion and difficult decisions have to go into that. I mean, we made a big decision a couple of years ago on a stop doing nature, and I know we still hear about it from a lot of folks. And so it's never a small task, but I think it's something that we need to continue to at least consider or look at options for. I think it's our duty to do that, and I think in any budget that's an important part of it. Councilmember Lohman?
Well, to that point that you've raised, we looked at one of our golf courses. Do we look at our other golf course in terms of does it make sense for us to be doing that? And the other one that I would add to that list is, we are looking at doing having a pool inside of the community center. What does that mean for our outdoor experience? Do we want to offer both of those, or are we going to conclude that? So I'll put those two out there. I mean, I've got a number of other ones I could add to the list, but I'll just put those two out there tonight to start that conversation. And maybe the answer is no, we want to keep both those items, because we've got folks going to that. But that's the question I have. So,
well, and I appreciate that, Councilmember. Thank you for that. I will note that in the working model, golf went from $105,000 to $0 in the 2025 tax levy. So I'm assuming that means we're doing, between the combination of Highland being off the city's hands and the work that Dwan is doing, I'm assuming they're in pretty good shape there. Yep. But it's a good question to have. And I think the second question regarding the aquatic center as it relates to the indoor aquatic portion of what the community center might be, I think that will be a discussion to have. I don't think it's a discussion to have this year because we're 3 years out from cutting the ribbon on that facility. So I don't know that we want to make that decision quite yet, but it's certainly something that I think would be in the mix as we have that conversation continuing.
Yep, and that's sort of where we run into the problems with the bussy principle. We've got all these reasons why we could hang on to it.
And Mr. Mayor and council members, I've mentioned this I think a couple times, but when we went through the lowest point over the last few years in the wake of the pandemic, and we had our community budget advisory committee, and they made a number of recommendations, there was only one service that we eliminated in total. And we're still hearing about it, right? And it was 4 years ago with the motor vehicle licensing. This is hard. It's not an I told you so or in any way meant to discourage that kind of conversation. But change is hard, right? People come to rely on these services. They appreciate these services, and so when you're talking about services that people value, it's a hard conversation. So.
Yeah, and I'm one of your chief critics on that one. So,
Councilmember D'Alessandro.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So one of the other things that I've mentioned up here, I don't know, probably every time I talk, is going on a road diet around here. I love that conversation, and I'll just talk to it until they fire me. But it is literally $10 million a year every year, and I know that the majority of that comes from our utility service, right? So it's not in franchise fees and things like that. It's not in the general budget, but because that's all used for maintenance on roads, we never seem to have the money that we need for sidewalks, trails, and other things like that. And so then the parks team has to go find that in places like the general fund, right? And so I'd like to just throw out there one more time, I'd love to understand what it would look like if, what is it called, our CPI, right? Our condition percentage index or some
PCI, the pavement condition.
Pavement condition index. Yep. What would that look like if our pavement condition index, like numbers, were adjusted and it stretched the need for our roads to be maintained by, 2 years, 5 years, whatever the number is? What does that do in terms of freeing up millions of dollars every year for us to do these other things that we know our people want, that would mean that we don't have to go find the money for that in our general fund budget? I don't know why we won't do that analysis. I would love to hear Here's why, Lona, because there's no way we could do it because here's what would happen. Okay, great, I'll shut up. But I don't have the information, and I think it would be really very interesting to get that information. If our PCI is just indexed a little high and we could tolerate our roads degrading just a little more, how much money does that free up? I think it's fascinating to think about.
Councilmember Carter, question?
I just had a clarifying question. So the term road diet is often used when communities are talking about making roads smaller, like narrower. That's not what you're talking about. You're talking about just not
I'm talking about not spending as much money on road maintenance every year. When I say diet, I'm talking about financial diet because that's the budget discussion tonight.
It's an actual term
A little different.
because
yes.
road diet means a different thing.
Oh, well, we can have that conversation too. We can have that conversation too, but in the context of budget, I'm referring to specifically the fact that the PMP is $10 million. We don't even talk about it. We just assume it's going to happen year after year after year. And I don't know that we have to spend $10 million a year on road maintenance. And I'd like to just understand, either convince me that we do or show me that we don't so that we can take $2 million of that $10 million a year and do a trail or something else so that we don't have to spend general fund dollars on $2 million worth of projects, and we've saved some real money from our taxpayer services. So that's all I'm asking for, and it feels reasonable to me. But if y'all think I'm crazy, that's cool too.
I think it's reasonable.
She's crazy.
Fair enough.
Mr. Verbrugge, response at all, or
Yep,
your
Mr.
mic's
Mayor,
on, yeah.
we can have our engineering team take a look at it if council wants to do that. Yep.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I won't ask again if it comes back and it's really reasonable. I just don't know who determines the PCI in the first place. What's let me ask you, let me put it in the same.
Councilmember, your point was made. Right? I think we're.
Yeah,
you've got
the context is the same
yes,
as the
so
reserve fund question,
yes.
right?
Well, I was just going to say, it segues very nicely into our next discussion, which is regarding our reserve funds, where similarly, I'm not sure exactly how our reserve levels were set or where they're set or why. I think we all can agree that reserve funds are important to have. The question is the level of the reserve funds and whether we are at an appropriate level. And the recommendation or the idea to go with GFOA, I think that makes a lot of sense to have this discussion and look at it analytically and figure out where we are and what makes the most sense for us. And you mentioned something, and it made me think about it. I mean, you talked about an all funds analysis, is that a better approach? Which then triggered in my mind, is it possible to have an all fund reserve fund? Why do we need to parse them out by a different department, by different use, different budget total? I mean, can we just have, is there a savings available, and an economies of scale, just having a large, here's our risk management reserve fund, and everybody has access to it? I don't know. I have no idea. So I think it makes sense to go forward, and I think it makes more sense to have GFOA do it, and nothing against staff, but you guys have plenty to do already, and I think it makes sense to have GFOA maybe dig into it and see what the answer to all of these questions might be. Councilmember Nelson, a question?
Yeah.
And then Councilmember Lohman?
Thank you, Mayor. I generally agree with you in the all funds discussion, and is there a way to combine all and or some that are similar? Had that conversation earlier with the city manager. In terms of who does it, I think if I heard correctly, they were looking at staff leading it but working with GFOA. So if you're comfortable with that, I would support that. I would also throw out an idea. Timing might be an issue of doing something similar to the Budget Advisory Committee, doing a GFOAAC. So, but, if you were looking for, we talked when we did that Budget Advisory Committee, and I know Councilmember Mua served on that, and it was very helpful. We talked about, hey, maybe periodically there are big issues that it would make sense to get informed people from the community to come in and help. If city staff is feeling like they're a little bit stretched thin, that might be a reasonable approach. But there's also a time thing, so I would give you guys time to think about that and whether or not it made sense. I'm just throwing it out as an idea. Also, I'd like, as part of that process, and this came up earlier, to look at policy options that came up with regards to like accrued payroll and benefits and things like that. If there's budget policy recommendations that come back out of that, say, well, if we changed our policy, it would help there. And the other one I would throw in there is like the self-insurance fund. What is our reinsurance level? When does that kick in? What are the cost benefits of that, of us having a higher amount accrued there versus us having a lower amount and having a reinsurance on that type of process. And then the last item I had on this was, will that also include strategic priorities, my favorite of all funds?
Mr. Mayor and council members, Councilmember Nelson, working in reverse order. Yes, we will look at the Strategic Priorities Fund because one of the recommendations I will have for you is that some of the items that we are proposing as reductions from the budget entries are ones that we think would potentially be projects you want to continue forward with, and the best place to do them is in Strategic Priorities Fund. So we will talk about what we are proposing for that and show you the long-term forecast for what the Strategic Priorities Fund looks like. To the point about whether it makes sense to maybe have an advisory group as we go through the process of looking at reserves, I think that we would want to do that if we do it, if council wants to do it as a staff exercise, rather than using the consultants in that, because one of the things we're trying to do is contain the consultant cost here, and anytime we have them for extra hours working with that group, it's going to cost us more. And on the timing question, it would be, I agree, great if we could have it done by the time we get through the budget process. Even if we don't, I think it still makes sense for us to go forward anyway. We've had this conversation here for as long as I can remember about what is the right amount, the assumptions that we make, and how we forecast into the future. And so I think it makes sense to go ahead with the study, irrespective of whether it gets done this year or not.
I would agree with that. Councilmember Lohman, were you next?
Yeah,
Councilmember Lohman.
So if we were able to get this, if we couldn't get this done, this assessment done by budget time, then I would be in favor of doing an advisory group if it's going to go past that period of time. And then Mayor, I'm generally supportive of in terms of having the consultants come in and do it, but I do want to make sure that we have some expertise kind of going forward with respect to this, so we can kind of have an ongoing kind of analysis with this whole portion here. So I am looking forward to us looking into this. And then if we do an all funds approach, I hope that when we're looking at the analysis, what that means from a self-insurance portion of that, because we've got part of our benefits that are self-insured, and I would be a little bit nervous if we're double, or if we don't account for that or somehow miss, not have that included as a part of that. So I just want to be sure, if we're looking at that, and I just get nervous about the details. And with the tenure of this council, turnover and that kind of thing, and just kind of understanding what is in that bucket, and from a long-term perspective, if we forget about what that is, and then we further down the line, then reduce that and create new risks, that's be another thing I'd be concerned about. That we're just sure that we're able to make sure we can kind of continue to understand what that means. And then my last question that I have is not related to that at all, but in terms of the positive forecasted variance for 2024, do we have an idea of where that's going to come in this year in terms of what that looks like?
Mr. Mugi, or
Go ahead, Gary.
Austin?
Mayor and council members, Councilmember Lohman. So for 2024, I don't have that off the top of my head, where we might come in for 24. But for the year that ended 2023, there was a 1.1 million positive budget variance over what we need to have in the working capital goal. So there is still that we haven't brought forward yet to move.
And that's coming up on an upcoming council agenda is to make that transfer for the positive budget variance this year into the Strategic Priorities Fund. So the end of 23, we deposit in 24. We don't have a projection yet for the end of 24.
Okay, and that's just something I'm thinking about as we look at these overall numbers that we're almost every year we see that budget variance. And I know in previous years it was higher, but we had certain dollars in there that were designated. So I just want to be sure that we're not overcounting what we have in there, but that would be nice to kind of use that to reduce the overall levy as well.
Yeah, and Mr. Mayor and council members, Councilmember Lohman, actually, I'm glad you mentioned the positive budget variance. If folks are paying attention and they hear us talk about every year we have this positive budget variance at the end of the year where we have more money, are they being overtaxed? Well, here's one of the requirements of our charter is that we have to levy for a contingency. And that contingency is 2.5% of our operating expenditures for the coming year. And so each year we have an amount that we are levying that doesn't relate at all to our day-to-day operations. It is a requirement as essentially a safeguard against the unexpected that the founding fathers of the city of Bloomington thought was important to safeguard our finances. So there's always going to be, unless we have some black swan events like we did 4 years ago, but in most circumstances, at the end of the year, we're going to finish on the right side of the ledger.
And thank you for that clarification. I thought it was just a good budgeting practice. But I didn't realize it was in the charter. That is interesting to hear. I did not know that. Councilmember Carter.
Thank you, Mayor. So I guess I just had wanted to share my thoughts on the idea of an advisory committee, and I hesitate to establish something like that for this because it is so staff intensive, and if we are trying to control consultant costs, that worries me. The other piece of this is it looks like this Rethinking Reserves initiative is relatively new, and they are the experts on it. And I guess I would just want to be super, super clear if we had an advisory committee, what exactly is their role? And it's not clear to me what that would be, because this seems like a very specific skill set and expertise. And so, but with that said, I do think that we should absolutely, if the consultants have ideas or staff have ideas on what are some key questions we can ask the community and engage them, I think that would be important. But maybe I'm overly sensitive to this now that I work for a nonprofit, and there's always lots of ideas to create committees and work groups, and I'm like, oh my gosh, it's very staff intensive. And so I guess I just wanted to share that thought. But yeah, thank you.
Thanks for that perspective, Councilmember. I appreciate that. Councilmember Moat.
Thank you, Mayor. I would agree with what Councilmember Carter just mentioned as well. Being part of the Budget Advisory Committee and being a resident, it took a significant amount of time to get caught up and understand exactly what we were talking about. And I think when you originally pitched the idea, it was like 3 months, but it ended up being 9 months, however long it was. And and I think the trouble with that is that if we need people who understand the budget, there's a small pool of people we can actually pull from. And so I think that's the challenge, is we would have limited scope of people we could pull from, and then as people kind of dissipate, then like what happens to that committee? And so I would much rather lean on the consultants, and then if we want to do something like this, bring on a program later that can help bring residents along who are interested in this, but I don't think that's a solution we would need for this year or in the short term.
Thank you for that perspective. Councilmember Rivas and then Councilmember D'Alessandro, please turn your mic on, Councilmember Rivas. Oh, good. Yep.
I just got 3 text messages from investors that live in the city that would love to be part of an advisory committee. So I agree with that. I think it would be a good venue for the public to get involved with certain restrictions, with specific intentions, not just to bring them in, but there are people that would like to participate on it. That's all I had to say.
Good to know. Yep. Again, I think it's all TBD. We're still kind of working through all of this. Councilmember D'Alessandro, did you have something to add?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Related to that, open question about whether or not that work needs to be done right now if it isn't going to be useful to us in the 2025 budget, or if we make that kind of a Q1 25 initiative would be an open question I would ask, because I would love to have it going into next budget, because one of the big things that comes out of it, which dovetails into the question of community engagement, is let's say they say you didn't need that much reserves. Now we have this pot of money. Now what do we do with it?
Yeah.
And that's where community engagement becomes, if you have investors, Councilmember Rivas, there's nothing to invest right now. But if there is something to invest, I'd love to hear what people's ideas are and things of that nature. And so I don't know if it makes sense to do it right now amongst all the other crazy that's going on in the fourth quarter here around the budget, putting that burden on Kari and team. But in the first quarter of next year, to have that information going into next year's budget might be really interesting. Think about all those community budget engagement things that could dovetail with hey, we have this fund that's not strategic priorities, that is this thing that's coming out of this decision. What do you think, right? I think that'd be very interesting to me. So
Well,
I don't know if the timing makes a difference.
I think that makes a good point. And we heard from Ms. Carlson, she wasn't sure what the timing might be on it. So I think we'll learn soon. I think, ideally, if it could be useful for this budget cycle, that'd be fabulous. My guess is it might be a bit of a push. We're pushing to the end of August already. But it is something, as Mr. Verbrugge said, we've been talking about for a number of years now. And I think to work toward resolution on this one way or another, and to get some answers, just to figure this out a little bit better, I think would make sense, whether it is for this budget cycle or the next. Councilmember Nelson, we're wrapping things up here.
Yeah, thank you. Just want to explain kind of where my head was. It was not to be working with the consultants, because what I had heard is that this was going to be staff-led, and it was to provide additional resources to help staff was my thought process. I would be very hesitant to not do anything in this budget cycle. And if that means that there's an advisory committee next year or there's never one, I mean, I'm perfectly comfortable just throwing the idea out there to be supportive of their time frame and things. But I do think it might, if you can at least look, and I'm perfectly fine if you guys come back and say this is what we can get done this year, and if we could get 20% of it done, or if we could look at a couple of the funds, or if we could do like a test drive of something, so we go by a fund by fund analysis, and maybe we do the all fund next year. We look at some of our big funds, do something this year, whatever we can do. I don't know what that is. I'm not going to give you the answer to that question, but I trust you guys can come up with that. But I do think that we've identified this. We identified it last year. I do think there's significant money in those reserves. That doesn't mean I think that there's huge savings necessarily. The answer will be based on the facts, not based on my assumptions, and so I would like to see something done on it this year, even if that's a first step of kind of getting our feet wet and learning the process and learning how that works, and then expanding that next year. And then maybe that's when we talk about how much we bring the community in, at what level, what is their exact charge. So.
And again, we'll know more when we know more here shortly, as Ms. Carlson reaches out to GFOA and tries to get us some answers. Any other comments or questions, Council? If not, so staff is recommending, I think, or at least looking for a guidance for the preliminary levy, and I think the notion here was 10.95%. Understanding that number could go lower, it cannot go higher, and just based on our discussion this evening, Council, is that where we're comfortable, or do we want to be the tick or two lower? What is the general thumbs up or thumbs down on this? Councilmember Lohman, questions?
Well, I guess what I would say is that, Mayor, you led off, kind of talking about the idea in terms of what are we not seeing, and that's where I feel uncomfortable with that 10.95. And if we just look at last year's number that we finally settled in, I think that's a little bit above that number that we have today. Or am I wrong with that? Is that what we did last year? Is that?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor and council members, Councilmember Lohman, last year's final was a 7.97. We started at a 9.49.
So 9.49, but in terms of a median value home impact, what would that number be?
The impact was higher last year.
Yeah.
Okay, and so that's sort of what I'm looking at in terms of.
Impact was in the high 6%.
Okay. So if I'm looking at that in terms of trying to, maybe we bump that a little number a little higher than that. Maybe we're at I'm looking at the levy increase. Maybe it's 11.95, because I don't know what's in that number. What are we cutting out? What are we, as Councilmember Mua say, kicking down the road? And I'm very uncomfortable with kicking that stuff down the road. I'd like us to kind of just take it on now, if it makes sense, to kind of do that. And how can we reduce that 13% that we're going to see next year, because I'm definitely not going to support a 13%. There's no way I'm going to support that. So I just would rather get it done this year, take on some of that so we can reduce in the out years.
Other thoughts? Not everybody at once. Councilmember Carter?
Thank you,
Councilmember Rivas. Councilmember Carter.
I guess I'm of a similar mind to Councilmember Nelson where, I don't get too worked up about the preliminary, I guess. I would be fine moving forward with this for now and then, but with the understanding that I would like to see a pretty considerable decrease for the final. So that's where I'm at.
Councilmember Rivas.
More of a question than a comment. So if we were to go with the 10% or 11%, we need to reduce 4.18 million, right? Out of the budget, right?
So that's what, of all of the budget inputs, yes.
So just like everybody, or at least some of the council members stated earlier, that what I would like to see is what we are reducing specifically. I mean, for the most part, I have the tendency to agree, even though it's going to be higher if we don't reduce anything, but if we provide the same quality of services, most people want the basics, roads, snow, public works, stuff like that. And as long as they get that in a consistent and high quality like we are used to in Bloomington, they're fine with it. But what I would like to see is what is it that we will be reducing if we go with 11%? Just to learn, just to know that we're making an informed decision on that.
And just from a process standpoint, Councilmember, we can get that information, and we don't have to set this tonight. We can continue this discussion. We'll set our preliminary levy in September.
September 9th.
September 9th. We're just trying to send some direction to staff right now. And if you're thinking, at this 11, Councilmember Lohman thinking a little bit higher, are we comfortable saying 10.95? Are we comfortable saying 11.5? What are we thinking? And that's the starting point. And then if we agree to that, then in September, it can only come down. It can't go higher. And so, as Councilmember Carter said, generally staff goes back and sharpens the pencils and figures out exactly how far they can bring it down. But to your point, and to the point that I made to start this off, I'd like to see what the cost is. I mean, not just the financial cost, but the cost in terms of services or in terms of what, the opportunity costs that we're missing.
With that said, that's what makes it very difficult to make a decision right now. Right. I mean, even though it's just a preliminary decision, still makes it hard to.
And to be clear, this isn't the decision. We'll make that decision on September 9th. This is just kind of direction for staff right now where we want to head.
Yeah.
Councilmember Nelson?
Thanks, Mayor. And just for Councilmember Rivas, if you're looking for that flexibility to look at that information, I would suggest go with a higher number.
Yeah.
We can just make the pencil more sharp then.
Yeah.
so, if you want to see that before you make that decision because you're not comfortable, then, go to 11.95 or something like that. Just do that. We can always bring it down later. This number is a legal requirement that we have to put some number out there, and it's not the final number. And like I've said, again, every year, I don't care about this number. I care about the last number. That's the one we're actually going to pay. Mm-hmm. So that's the one we're going to work on and do all the stuff that you're asking for. So that's just
and Mr. Mayor and council members, I'm comfortable doing that if you're comfortable doing that. Just because we got a lot in play this year, right? And I don't expect that we're going to land at 12%. I think our challenge is trying to help people understand what it is that they're going to be getting with the investment, whatever that amount is, and then help them understand the impact. So, we spent a fair amount of time on that second column, but if you look at that third column, so what does that compare to at, 10.95%? That's a Happy Meal, right? Take your kids to McDonald's once a month, it's a Happy Meal. That's what we're talking about in terms of what the median value home gets, right? Or if you don't have kids, then that next one up is probably a venti frappuccino at Starbucks, right? Literally, that's, let's put it in context of what we're talking about. So, yeah. So I guess the question is, do you want Happy Meals or venti frappuccinos? That's the policy discussion going forward. So, yeah. Tell you what, we'll take the input. We'll go back as staff and bring something back for September 9th. We'll forecast to you in an upcoming BTW what that's probably going to be, and then when we get there, you'll have the opportunity to make a final decision.
Was this helpful? Was this helpful?
It's very helpful. It is. Thank you.
All right, helpful.
Yes, thank you very much.
All right, and thank you. Thanks for the information and thanks for the conversation. Council, thank you for the conversation. I think this is, once again, good, healthy discussion about a variety of different things. And I have said before, and I continue to say, that this is the most important discussion that we have all year. That this and these discussions, these decisions are the most important things that we do as a city council. And so I appreciate the thought that goes into it. I appreciate the willingness of everybody to look at this not only thoughtfully and analytically, but with empathy and with heart also. And I think that's an important part of it. And it's equal parts, I think, science and art and belief in what we're doing here. So thank you for the conversation. With that, Council, I think we've got item 2.2, our City Council policy and issue update. Anything to talk about this evening? My goodness, hands everywhere. Councilmember Nelson, then Councilmember Lohman, then Councilmember D'Alessandro. Councilmember Nelson.
Yeah, thanks. Mine will be quick. I was at the off-leash park over the weekend, and a question came up. There's signs. They're going to do the maintenance there, which is great. But there were some signs about personal belongings and things like that. So people were confused on what would be taken because a lot of people have brought over like water bowls, chairs, and things like that, and they were worried that staff was going to come and clear all that stuff out of there. And they checked the website. I personally have not looked at the website and exactly what it says, but if there could be some clarification of that for people on the website, just so they know, because I know a lot of people have, just made it a nice place for themselves to come, and it's good to have chairs for people that maybe can't walk their dog or stand the whole time. So.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor and council members, Councilmember Nelson, thanks for raising that issue. First of all, if folks aren't familiar with the change and you do go to the dog park, we do want to just provide regular maintenance to make sure it's staying up to a standard that I think people have for what the environs look like when they are hanging out there or their pups are hanging out there. And I'll get clarity about what they mean about personal property, because yes, people bring some stuff out there. We don't want it to become, a collector's roadshow on the property, right? So we'll get some clarity and see if we can add some additional messaging. And I believe that maintenance is going to happen Wednesday mornings on a regular, like once a month. Yeah. So,
Councilmember Lohman.
Thank you, Mayor. A question I've had from a couple of different residents, and I'm sure I've probably have an email or two about this campaigning inside of the farmers market. Is that something that can that be done? How's that handled?
Sure, Mr. Mayor and council members, Councilmember Lohman. State statute requires that there has to be at least a 100-foot separation from the voting place within a building. So when we have absentee and early voting that's going on here in Civic Plaza, we will have identified where that 100-foot spacing is. It's in the gallery, so some of it's going to extend out onto the sidewalk. Some of it's going to extend this way to the other end of the atrium, and people cannot be conducting any sort of campaigning, solicitation, influence, accosting voters, right, within that space. On election day itself, it's actually of the property, so there can't be any inside the building or in the parking lots. So during absentee and early voting, it's a little less stringent. So it's actually within 100 feet from the place itself. On election day, it's the whole site. Okay, and statute identifies the different things that people are precluded from doing. The only thing really that they can have that is message-based is I voted stickers. So anything else, if somebody's wearing a candidate's shirt, they can't be in that restricted zone. So people who are trying to leaflet or to canvass will have to respect the boundary separations during the rest of this fall, especially for this building. And our staff is aware of that. Our elections staff will always have somebody here who knows those distance separations. So if there's a question that arises, they will either ask a person or, if necessary, we can have a sergeant at arms. I don't know that we actually do have a sergeant at arms. Law enforcement is not allowed to just hang out. Right? Police can't just hang out in the polling place, but if we have an issue, we will just call the police and they'll also respond as well.
Okay, thanks for that clarification. I didn't realize you could literally do that, because that's in past years we've had people say, hey, you can't be doing that out over there. So it's good to get that clarification on that. So then the second thing I have is kind of a thank you to both city manager, mayor, and Councilmember D'Alessandro for showing up to our mid-year celebration with the Sustainability Commission. It's always great to see folks. I know we have lots of demands on our times and that kind of thing, so I understand when folks can't make it. I was late there too. I had to work late that day and couldn't get there right on time. So I was late to my own thing. And then with that being said, just had another quick question about sustainability in and of itself. Have we done a service assessment just related to sustainability, or any of our equity areas? Because I know we've made substantial changes over the last couple of years as it relates to both those two areas. I know we've got a big budget request that's kind of coming through, and it's kind of one of the questions I've kind of had, after sitting at that, and we've seen a lot of change. And so I'm just curious, are we properly staffed in both areas?
Mr. Mayor and council members, Councilmember Lohman, we have not programmed either sustainability or Office of Racial Equity for a service assessment at this point in time. It is not unheard of that we would do that with one of our strategic focus areas. And as an example, I would share that we've been going through the process with our COED, the Community Outreach and Engagement Division, which has now been functioning for about 5 years, of taking a look and making sure that we still have them focused in the areas that council set out as expectations, and sort of the process that we designed in terms of how they work with our staff and work with our community. So if that's something that council is interested in doing, would appreciate if you share that feedback with us, especially we go through this year. Because of the length of time that would likely take, it wouldn't be an influencer into the 25, but if it's something that you'd like us to take a look at during 25, we can certainly program that in for the coming year.
Yeah, Mayor, the only reason why I had an interest in that is I know we talk about there being a climate emergency and about the changing demographics within our city, and those are things that are serious components of our overall mission that we talk about. I just wonder if it makes some sense to kind of look at those things as we kind of go into our future years, and what that would mean as we look back at our mission statement that we've kind of said we were going to do. So,
Councilmember D'Alessandro.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I hope you all had as much fun as I did on National Night Out. This is our first meeting back from there, and what I always love about it is I get random requests for information that I don't know the answer to, and then I play stump the city manager with these requests, and so it was a super fun one. I have a really interesting and probably really easy to do thing that I want to put in front of council as a result of National Night Out inquiries. Today, we do not allow, not because we explicitly don't allow it, but because it would be considered graffiti, curbside numbers, house numbers. We just don't do it. Makes some sense in the sense that like 6 months out of the year they're covered by snow. So I get that. But if people wanted to, we could carve out and put a small item in our policy that says you can do it. Here are the parameters that you need to use. Here's the stencil that you need to use. They all need to be uniform, a certain size, and you have to use reflective paint or whatever. We could come up with something. Any reason not to do that in your minds? Or, because it's literally probably 2 lines exception type thing that we'd put into the code. We never talked about it, and people were like, yeah, why don't we do that? It's so good for the fire department, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, I don't know why we don't do this.
Well, my initial response is, it's good for the fire department 6 months of the year.
Yeah, exactly.
And, and I think,
Or less, as you know, climate change is
exactly,
happening. But
exactly. I would not, I'd be fine with it, but I think it couldn't be in a replacement for the house numbers, on the house or
That's right.
built in somewhere.
no, just to
I mean-
give them if they want to do it, give them the parameters that they could do it and
Yeah.
let them do it. And we're not paying for it per se or anything, but if the people wanted to do it, we could give them a little guidance and a stencil concept and like, here's the font you need to use. I don't know, like
Yep.
whatever. Have at it.
Mr. Verbrugge?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor and council members, thank Councilmember D'Alessandro because last week she was playing Stump the City Manager when she sent me that question. And so I sent it to our staff and the deputy city attorney said, well, you're playing Stump the Legal Department. So it took us a little bit of digging before we did determine, yes, if somebody wanted to paint their address on their curb, that's graffiti based on what our code says. Now, my checking in with different departments, because I went through engineering and I went through planning and I went through legal. I don't think anybody's going to have their hair on fire if we have an exemption and have house numbers painted on curbs. It's not a standard practice around here. Down southwest, if you've traveled, you see it in other places, right? So I think if council says, yeah, go ahead, bring it forward, I think it's a pretty simple thing. But just kickstarting that will also just give us the opportunity to think just a little bit more deeply if there's anything that we haven't thought of when we were going around just asking the question of why is it not allowed, right? And so we just want to make sure that we cover all our bases, but certainly not opposed to taking a look at it.
Councilmember Carter?
Thank you, Mayor. So I guess I don't have a differing opinion, but I do think we should engage the community because I did grow up in Oklahoma and Texas where you have the spray painted numbers on your curbs and like aesthetically it's not pleasing to, it's not, and people might have opinions about that. But I also don't think it should be considered graffiti. You know what I mean? I don't think there should be like severe penalties or whatever, but I also would be interested to know what the majority of people who have strong opinions in the community would think about that.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor and council members, Councilmember Carter, appreciate that. Consistent with how we do things is that we always factor in some sort of an engagement step when we're considering changes to our ordinance. And realistically, because of the time of year right now, by the time we got through drafting something, bringing it through the process, it's to the point of the year where nobody's going to be out painting their curb anyway. So it's not going to happen until next summer if the council wanted to provide that flexibility, so it gives us some time.
Sure. All right, anything else, council? Yep, I think so. And thank you for the couple of folks talking about events. On Saturday, the Learning Link Up that the school district put on was fantastic over at Valley View Park, or at Valley View Middle School. And then the On the One Festival, Avant Garde does a fantastic job putting that on every year. And both were fantastic events and good community builders in a variety of different ways. So, and don't think I didn't win the mascot race against the mascots and the principals also, and pulled every muscle in my body. Yeah, I haven't sprinted in 20 years. So, council, if there is nothing else, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
We have a motion and a second to adjourn. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, motion carries 7-0. We are adjourned. Thanks much. Thank you again, Kari.
Thank you.